Making a video. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Mostly. It's all my plants. Plants. Waiting for the weather to improve so they can be put in the ground. It's still cold. You know, I haven't had a 70-degree day in May, I don't think. It's just been really dismal. But anyway, then on top of that, yeah, yeah, Lyme disease again. The milder version where I actually get the rash, which is weird. The one where I get the rash is the one that's not so bad. Anyway, but yes, yeah, you can sort of see it, blotchy spot there. Just kept getting bigger and bigger. Anyway, don't really understand how this is happening. I mean, I take a 120-degree shower every night. I mean, this whole idea of having to spend my life, looking for ticks every 2 hours is really an unpleasant thought. Sorry, I haven't used this chair yet this year, so it's probably full of ticks. See, this stuff. See, all this creepy crap. It's where all the ticks come from. But yeah, I mean, it's woods everywhere and deers everywhere, so death. There's some new, untreatable disease being carried by Lyme ticks now, so I guess they'll let people get killed by that now too. There's no civilization. It's just none. 15 years and they haven't fixed the problem. 15 years. Anyway, so all beside the point. So yeah, it's sort of related though, because pyrrho, response video to pyrrho. This is the pyrrho types, the ones that just make it impossible to get anything done. In my opinion, they're these progressives that have no sense of pragmatism, no sense of being, oh, let's be realistic for 10 minutes. Let's not just do this fantasy, everything will be okay bullshit or silver lining crap. Now and then you got to pull out the noxious gas. Every now and then you do have to gas them, the little critters. You got to do something about something. You can't just pretend it's, the future will invent a cure. It's bullshit. So anyway, he says that, I and the Hothlidae are doing logic wrong, are doing conversation wrong, are doing, he says thinking, but see, that's cheating, because thinking is something you do internally, and that really doesn't have anything to do with communicating with other people, or arguing, or debating, or even if you want to call it having a conversation. If we have a conversation about stuff we know, like if I go around telling you, look, plants are green, and I tell you a bunch of information, I could go into chlorophyll and this and that and reflected light and all this stuff, and it's all stuff you already knew. That would become so tedious so fast. If I just recited a bunch of things you already know with quite a bit of certainty. Did you know the Earth is round? All these, that's trivia, and it's trivial in terms of a human interaction. The challenge is to doing the courtroom thing. The challenge is to show up as parties, as advocates for a position, but also as jurors and judges. And we're all playing that role when we have a conversation. We're all trying to be fair, but we're all have a perspective that we think is secure, and we have lots of narrative. We have lots of story of life history to validate our conclusion. Now, somebody can believe in, let's say, witches, because they went to many witches and the witches did amazing things and blah 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 blah. Now, it's all anecdotal, it would all be bullshit, but the person could have that experience and have a confidence that no, you just don't understand. They really do channel the dead, and they really do this, and they really do that, because they've seen it, and they're really attached to the idea that what they saw wasn't just a phenomenon of coincidence. So they're going to advocate and try to explain, like, well, look, what others, maybe they'll come up with other evidence. Now, what often people do is they resort to bullshit, like the truthers and the 9/11 kind of people, or the Fed conspiracy people, or the Illuminati conspiracy people. What they end up resorting to is fallacious, just, garbage evidence that's been debunked a zillion times, evidence that was just made up, stories that were just made up. And, so they just cheat. So they're really bad at being a judge, a referee of the trial, in the sense they'll allow themselves to play very loose with the standards of evidence. And they might object if somebody else does the same thing. That kind of hypocrisy will be revealed. So anyway, in defense of myself and the Hothlidae, in terms of understanding what the process of communication and argument is, the process is first you have to agree on what evidence is evidence. They do that at a trial. They have to have, before the trial starts, they have discussions about, well, is this knife going to be allowed in? And we found another knife over there. Can we allow that knife in also? And are past crimes going to be allowed in? Are statements made to other people going to be allowed in? You judge the quality of the evidence and whether it's relevant to the subject you're defending. And meaningful to that conversation. And this is the process of establishing what your premises for this trial are going to be. And so there's nothing me and Hothlidae are advocating that is at all backward. It's essential to conducting a rational trial. You can't allow evidence to just pop up. You can't sit there and conduct the trial and then all of a sudden somebody starts talking about, well, I heard that she's a slut, and that she'll fuck anybody, and this kind of thing. You can't let that happen. That breaks the conversation or the debate or the argument. So there has to be rules about what's going to be evidence. And so you go about looking at the world and you say, look, well, do we agree about evolution, or do we agree about this, or do we agree about that? And you find these premises that establish the conversation. Now, the part where Hothlidae goes wrong is that he doesn't understand you really can't have the conversation if you can't agree on the premises. So we're already done having a logical discussion as soon as he says, well, because I can't turn my consciousness, even if I put it in a jar, I don't know if that would convince him. I think it might. Actually, if I could actually just extract the part of me that feels and put it in a jar, and he could see that arrangement of matter creates a negative sensation, pain and suffering, let's say, then maybe he could understand its existence in reality. But anyway, to cut that short, is his basic philosophical notion is that because you can't materialize our feelings, therefore they don't exist. They have no significance. They don't generate something called value, because somehow only a material thing can generate value or create it or cause it or something like that. And even then, there's scant hope. It's, again, he doesn't think the notion of value is a real thing conceptually. It's not a material concept. It's an attribute something has that doesn't really have anything to do with materiality. It again has, obviously it does in the sense that only material things can create phenomenon in the universe, but it still means something, and he doesn't see the idea of mean something because it's not a physical process. It's not one thing banging into another thing. Well, anyway, point is me and Hothlidae can't start a conversation because, say, the most important piece of evidence in the trial, the bucket, or the murder weapon, let's say, we can't agree on it as evidence. We can't agree of what it is, whether it's relevant to the case, or, there's just no agreement, and therefore there's no trial. Because it's the most significant fact there is in the trial, the murder weapon. If you're not going to let that in the trial, then we're not going to have, I'm not playing, fuck that. So we can't agree on on what the the ground rules are going to be. Now, if he wants to concede the existence of this thing called sensation and its meaning and its value, then we can have a conversation what the logical implications are of this value thing being created by these sentient organisms, and how do you manage this value interest. Well, now we can have a conversation about what's reasonable and pragmatic and what's cost effective and what's efficient. But without it, we can't have the conversation. Now, the problem with Pyrrho is that he thinks everything in the universe is acceptable. Any story, any narrative, anything, because he has such uncertainty about any facts. So if I say evolution's a fact, that evolution created life on Earth, all the living things on Earth are descended from one living thing, and that it's basically a selfish gene narrative, that's the limitation of our creation. That's the context of creation. No voodoo, no gods, no magical purpose. The universe didn't want to live. None of that shit is acceptable as part of the story. You have to deal with the dinosaur origins, the brutal great white shark substance of the game being played, the 10,000 dead sea turtles for one that survives to maturation. 10,000 die, so one can get laid. That kind of relationship exists throughout nature. That reality. So that's the context. That's the fact that has to be in this trial. But Pyrrho will keep trying to fudge that fact. So if he'll accept it, he'll say, that's what it is. And then he'll say, okay. But then as soon as the trial starts, he'll start talking about the silver lining mechanism, or the symbiotic hopey-dopey, aromatherapy or something, that somehow undermines the necessity or the actual fact that you have to see this in this context. So, and he does, you can see this in a lot of arguments where he'll just, the subject will keep getting changed when he doesn't like the tone of it. And so again, that you can't really have a conversation until you agree on what the evidence in the trial is going to be. And now you can debate about what this evidence indicates, what it points to as a fact, guilt or innocence, productive, unproductive, valuable, worthy of perpetuation, not worthy of perpetuation. So you can start answering the questions about the value. Now, some questions, again, are always going to be uncertain. Or I'm not saying there's not some uncertainty in our lives. I've used many times the example because I think it's a good example of how to, if you want to help people that have malaria, if you want to do something about malaria, what do? Do you try to mitigate against the harm done to people that are alive today? Manufacture netting and insecticides and try to reduce how much suffering there is caused by malaria? Or do you invest the money in a vaccine or in the possibility of an eradication program with the effort of creating a cure? And those are always tough choices to make from our ignorant, level of understanding of what exactly, how possible is it? What's our odds? And it's really hard to see the odds of the game of trying to create a vaccine for such things. I don't think a vaccine would be malaria is not a virus, right? So it's people use the word vaccine all the time, like Lyme disease. They use the word vaccine, and I just think that might be a technically messed up way of looking at it, because generally speaking, vaccines are for viruses. You're essentially vaccinating the cell from getting infected by the virus. But to have a vaccine against a microbe is a lot more complicated, because it's harder to kill the big things. In the sense, it's harder to create a white blood cell kind of response, an immune system response to invaders. big invaders. So anyway, so yeah, I don't think vaccines are kind of appropriate. I mean, the whole way of creating vaccines, it's a blood response, and the blood isn't. It's kind of hard to create toxic blood to an invading worm. The acid blood or something. It's really hard to kill a worm with blood, where a vaccine can be killed by the blood. But anyway, I don't want to get into that. Well, it's a reasonable thing to get into because all these subjects are kind of valid. But anyway, the whole argument I'm arguing for here is, that this is one of the discussions or the conversations that doesn't take place. See, that's the other part of it. We never have these conversations to the death. We're never able to resolve any of these conversations through time. We just redundantly keep arguing the same arguments over and over and over because nothing is declared as the winner of establishing these certain axioms. And so religion keeps surviving and silly notions keep surviving, and they can't, it seems impossible to eradicate the bad vocabulary and the bad definitions of words and the bad understanding of the process of communicating. And they just sort of have to do it in a piece by piece, methodical way if you're going to do it at all right. If you have much hope of doing it to some conclusion. And again, I'm just trying to think of, back to this perfect argument thing that could work on any person. There's people who say, I believe in evolution, but the evolution they believe in isn't the evolution I believe in. There's people who say they're concerned for the welfare of animals, but that seems to only apply to the ones in the overt concentration camps created by human beings, and it doesn't seem to cover the ones left out in the brutality of nature. The 10,000 baby sea turtles they somehow aren't so concerned for. You wonder how many, the ratio of attrition with the fish, our original origin, as a fish, that attrition rate is just so obscene. But anyway, Pyrrho makes these accusations all the time. So another thing he said is that we're doing confirmation bias, and it's just such a, it's such an empty accusation in the sense that based on what? Confirmation bias based on what conclusion are you saying is a confirmed, are we using our bias to establish a prejudice? And he's not going to demonstrate the prejudice. We have a prejudice for what? Having a rational conversation versus an irrational one that allows all kinds of silly evidence into the trial. In the middle of the trial, you just decide to, go dig up somebody's, who they had a relationship with 20 years ago and allow her to just, rag on the guy or something. I mean, what's your argument? Where's the confirmation bias in this conversation, and most certainly in this conversation saying there's nothing wrong with you having a narrative. There's nothing wrong with your stupid film strip idea that that's how you live your life. The point is, it doesn't mean anything in and of itself. They're just sources of information. They're just notes of information. You have to make those notes hearable to somebody else, or they don't have to accept them. You could say you saw a UFO. Why should I take that seriously? Why should I have to imagine seeing a UFO and saying, oh yeah, UFOs exist because I can imagine seeing one, and Pyrrho says he saw one, and it's not meaningful. So you have to make your argument, and first we have to establish what the facts are surrounding the conversation. And the fact is, you can't validate your I saw a UFO bullshit, so it doesn't have any meaning. It's just a distraction at trial. It's not relevant. I mean, really, you wouldn't have murder trials and then start talking about, well, the guy went to a spiritual once and the channeler told him that, he was Cleopatra's brother-in-law in a previous life, and, he's just getting back for all the trespasses that were done to him by all the subversion that was going on. You wouldn't let that kind of crap in as testimony. So, again, I don't have any obligation to argue your stupid. I watched a movie once and it gave me a gooey feeling. I don't have to, that's not evidence of anything. That doesn't mean anything. We have to agree on rational, logical, factual statements. The Earth is round. Evolution's the origin of life on the planet Earth. Evolution has certain cold and horrid rules. It's not a value game, it's a survival game. That kind of thing. So anyway, qualia only exists because of the behavior it produces. It doesn't exist because it's fun. It exists because it's a motivating mechanism. For fuck's sake. So anyway, yeah, that's probably enough. Probably dragged on longer than I should have. Speaking of dragging, yeah, I'm just, I was just starting to feel a little better. Shit. That's all I have to say. Shit. Problem with you can't, it's like so this one got me in the back of the leg, back of my knee, somewhere. Can't even see the bite mark, which is funny. The last bite mark took 3 months to actually go away, but no rash, just a little tiny mark. This one doesn't even have a bite mark. It has the ring of doom. But yeah, it's like you have to, it's really hard to see the back of your knees. And then you have to get some kind of like bright lights, and it's just such a hassle. It's the little stinking nymphs. They're just so tiny, the size of a period. Yeah. Anyway, I'm just frustrated because I thought I had a plan. I thought I had, guaranteed myself I was sufficiently defensive, and obviously not. So, fuck. And such.